It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. After years of saving, planning, and dreaming, I was finally marrying James, the man who had shown me what unconditional love truly felt like. The venue was perfect. A renovated barn with twinkling lights hanging from exposed wooden beams and wildflowers adorning every table. I'd spent months obsessing over every detail, from the handwritten place cards to the signature cocktails named after our first date. "You look beautiful," my mother whispered as she helped adjust my veil in the bridal suite. Her eyes glistened with tears, but I could see something else there too. Worry. "He's here, right?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My father, the man who had been absent for most of my life, showing up only when it was convenient or when he wanted something. Mom nodded, avoiding my eyes. "He's here. Just try to enjoy your day, sweetheart. Don't let him ruin this for you." I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my dress. I won't. I'd invited him because I thought it was the right thing to do, because some naive part of me still hoped that on my wedding day, he might actually act like a father for once. The ceremony went perfectly. James cried when I walked down the aisle, which made everyone laugh and then cry too. We wrote our own vows, promising to choose each other every day, to be partners through whatever life threw at us. When we kissed as husband and wife, the cheers were deafening. For those precious moments, I forgot about my father sitting stiffly in the third row, wearing an expression that looked more like he was attending a business meeting than his daughter's wedding. The reception started with cocktail hour, and I floated through it in a blissful daze, accepting congratulations and posing for photos. James never left my side, his hand warm and steady against my back, anchoring me through it all. "He's coming over," James whispered in my ear, his voice tense. I turned to see my father approaching, champagne glass in hand, wearing the fake smile I knew all too well from childhood, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Congratulations," he said, offering his hand to James first. "You've got quite a catch here." James shook his hand but didn't respond. He knew our history, knew how my father had walked out when I was 11, how he'd missed birthdays and graduations, how he'd made promises he never kept. Then my father turned to me. "You look lovely," he said, giving me a once-over that felt more like an appraisal than a compliment. This must have cost a fortune. There it was, the judgment, the subtle dig. Always about money with him. "We saved for it," I replied, keeping my voice light. "And James's parents were incredibly generous." Something flashed in his eyes. "Ah, yes. The future in-laws stepping in. Well, I'm sure they can afford it." I felt James tense beside me. "Actually, sir," he said, "we paid for most of it ourselves. Sarah worked double shifts at the hospital for 2 years so we wouldn't go into debt for our wedding." My father nodded, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. "I see you use the pearls," he said, gesturing to my necklace. "Your grandmother's." I touched the pearls at my throat. "Yes. Mom gave them to me when I graduated nursing school." He sipped his champagne. "You know, I paid for those originally, back when your mother and I were still married." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. Of course he would find a way to claim ownership over something that had been given to me with love. That was his pattern. Give with one hand, keep a ledger with the other. "Would you excuse us?" James said, his voice tight. "They're calling us for the entrance." We moved away, and I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I'm sorry," I whispered. James squeezed my hand. "Don't apologize for him. Not today. Not ever again." Dinner was a blur of toasts and laughter. My best friend Kelly told embarrassing stories from our college days. James's brother recounted how James had called him the night we met, saying he'd found the one. My mother spoke briefly but beautifully about love and new beginnings. My father didn't make a toast. He sat at his table, nursing his scotch, occasionally checking his phone. I told myself I didn't care, that his approval had stopped mattering long ago. But some small, wounded part of me, the part that would always be his little girl, still ached. After dinner came our first dance. James and I swayed to At Last by Etta James, and for those few minutes, the rest of the world fell away. Then the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. "You don't have to do this," James whispered. "It's tradition," I said, forcing a smile. "It'll be fine." I walked over to my father's table, where he was in conversation with my uncle. "Dad, it's time for our dance." He looked up, seeming almost surprised. "Right, of course." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, and followed me to the dance floor. The DJ put on My Girl by The Temptations, my choice, a song that reminded me of the few good memories I had from childhood, of him spinning me around our living room when I was very small, before things fell apart. We moved awkwardly to the music. My father held me at a distance, one hand barely touching my waist, the other clasping my hand too tightly. "Beautiful wedding," he said stiffly, though I can't help but notice I wasn't involved in the planning. I swallowed hard. We didn't want to impose. You're busy with work and Diane and the boys. His new family, the one he'd chosen over us. Still, "I am your father." The way he emphasized "am," like it was some title he held rather than a relationship he'd neglected. "Yes, you are." I couldn't think of anything else to say. The song felt endless. Around us, guests watched and smiled, unaware of the tension crackling between us. As the music began to fade, I thought we'd made it through, that we could both go back to our respective corners for the rest of the evening. But then, just as the final notes played, my father held onto my hand a moment too long. He looked me straight in the eyes, his gaze cold and calculating, and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "You know, I think it's time you gave back everything I ever gave you." The music stopped. People around us froze, conversations halting mid-sentence. The silence was deafening. "What?" I managed, sure I'd misheard him. His grip on my hand tightened. "Everything I ever gave you. I want it back. The college tuition, the car I helped with, the money for your first apartment." His voice grew louder. "All of it." I stared at him, unable to process what was happening. Was he serious? Was he drunk? Was this some kind of terrible joke? "Dad," I whispered, "this is my wedding day." "And a lovely one it is," he replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "One I wasn't asked to contribute to, despite apparently having the means to do so in your eyes." People were definitely staring now. I could feel their eyes on us, could hear the murmurs starting to spread through the crowd. "Let's discuss this another time," I said quietly, trying to pull my hand away. But he wouldn't let go. Instead, he extended his other hand, as if we were concluding a business deal. "No, let's settle it now. Everything I gave you. I want it back." Time seemed to stop. In that moment, I saw my father for who he truly was. Not the idealized parent I'd longed for all my life, but a selfish, bitter man who kept score and held grudges, who saw relationships as transactions. And something inside me finally, irrevocably broke. I looked into my father's eyes, the same hazel color as mine, and I made a decision. 27 years of trying to earn his love, of making excuses for his absence, of blaming myself for his distance. It ended right there on that dance floor. I smiled, a real smile that came from somewhere deep inside, from the place where I'd finally accepted the truth. Then I slowly, deliberately took his extended hand and shook it firmly, like we were closing a deal. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You're right. It's time I gave back everything you gave me." Surprise flickered across his face. He hadn't expected me to agree so easily. A few people nearby were watching us intently now, including my new mother-in-law, whose concerned expression told me she could sense something was wrong. "Good," my father said, recovering quickly. "I'll have my lawyer draw up." "No need for lawyers," I interrupted, still holding his hand in a firm handshake. "I can give it all back right now." Confusion replaced the smug satisfaction on his face. "What do you mean?" I looked at the large ornate clock on the wall. It was exactly 9:04 p.m. I would remember that time forever, the moment I finally set myself free. "First," I said calmly, "I'm giving back all the birthdays you missed. All 15 of them, from when I was 11 until I turned 26. I'm giving back the empty chair at my high school graduation, and the way I scanned the audience looking for you before I accepted my diploma." His face darkened. "Now, listen here." "I'm not finished," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I'm giving back the college tuition checks that always came with notes about how I should be grateful, how I should study something practical instead of nursing. I'm giving back the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong to make you leave." People were definitely staring now. My uncle had stood up from his table and was moving toward us. James was also making his way through the crowd, concern etched on his face. "This is ridiculous," my father hissed, trying to pull his hand away. But now I was the one who wouldn't let go. "I'm giving back the car you helped with, the one you remind me of every time we talk, even though your contribution was $3,000 toward a used Honda that I paid off by working night shifts. I'm giving back the constant feeling that nothing I do is ever enough for you." "Sarah," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "And most of all," I said, finally releasing his hand, "I'm giving back the idea that I need to earn your love. That's your gift, Dad. I'm giving it all back to you." The silence around us was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single person began to clap. It was Kelly, my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face. Then James's mother joined in, and his brother, and suddenly there was applause rippling through the room, my father's face contorted with rage and embarrassment. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough," came a firm voice from behind him. It was my mother, her small frame somehow imposing as she stepped between us. "Richard, I think you should leave." "This is between me and my daughter," he snapped. "Your daughter?" My mother laughed, a short, harsh sound. "The one whose dance recitals you missed? Whose college graduation party you skipped for a golf tournament? That daughter?" James reached us then, sliding his arm protectively around my waist. "Is everything okay?" he asked, though his expression made it clear he knew it wasn't. "Everything's fine," I said, surprised to find I actually meant it. My father was just leaving. My father looked around at the faces watching him, some confused, some angry, some pitying. Whatever reaction he'd expected when he confronted me, it clearly wasn't this. "Fine," he said coldly, "but don't come crying to me the next time you need something." I smiled again, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I won't. I promise." He turned and stalked away, pushing past guests who quickly moved aside. I watched him go, waiting for the familiar pain to hit, the hurt of his rejection, the ache of not being enough. But it didn't come. Instead, James pulled me close. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered against my hair. The DJ, sensing the tension, quickly started playing "We Are Family" by Sister Sledge. People began moving onto the dance floor, the awkward moment gradually dissolving into the celebration once more. Kelly appeared at my side, her mascara smudged from crying. "That," she said, "was the most badass thing I have ever seen." I laughed, a genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep and real. "I think I've been waiting my whole life to say those things." "Well, you picked a dramatic moment to do it," she replied, giving me a quick, fierce hug. "But seriously, are you okay?" I looked around the room, at James talking with his parents, at my mother laughing with her sister, at friends from every chapter of my life dancing and celebrating. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, and how for so long I'd allowed my father's absence to define me, to make me feel somehow incomplete. "I'm better than okay," I told her. "I think I'm finally free." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of joy and dancing. If anyone mentioned the incident with my father, they did it quietly, away from me. Instead, people came up throughout the evening to tell me how beautiful the ceremony had been, how delicious the food was, how much fun they were having. As the night wound down, James and I found a quiet moment alone in a corner of the venue. The band was playing something slow and sweet, and most of our guests were either dancing or saying their goodbyes. "Any regrets?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I considered the question carefully. "About us? Not a single one." "And about your dad?" I sighed. "I wish things could have been different. I wish he could have been the father I needed. But I don't regret what I said tonight." James nodded. "You know, my mom told me something once, after my parents went through their divorce. She said that sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family that sustains us. Sometimes we have to build that family ourselves, with the people who choose us every day." I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching our remaining guests laugh and dance under the twinkling lights. "I like that." "Me too," he said. "And for what it's worth, I choose you, Sarah. Every day. No strings attached, no ledger kept, no debt to be repaid." Tears pricked at my eyes, happy tears this time. "I choose you too." Later, as we were preparing to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "Are you all right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "That was quite a moment with your father." "I'm fine, Mom. Really." I squeezed her hands. "I think I finally said what I've needed to say for a long time." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry he couldn't just be happy for you today." "Don't apologize for him," I said, echoing James's words from earlier. "Not today. Not ever again." My mother smiled, a sad but proud smile. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," I replied, hugging her tightly. As James and I walked through the sparkler-lit path our friends had created toward our getaway car, I couldn't help but think about the contrast between the beginning and end of this day. What had started with anxiety about my father's presence had transformed into something unexpected, a moment of clarity, of setting boundaries, of finally understanding my own worth. The car was decorated with streamers and "Just Married" painted on the back window. James opened my door, then jogged around to the driver's side as our guests continued cheering and waving. "Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, grinning as he started the engine. I looked back at the venue one last time, at the people who had chosen to be there for us, who had celebrated our love and witnessed my moment of truth. My father wasn't among them. He had left right after our confrontation, without saying goodbye to anyone. But for the first time in my life, his absence didn't leave a hole. Instead, I felt complete, filled to the brim with love and possibility, and the knowledge that I was enough, exactly as I was. "Ready?" I said, turning to my husband with a smile. And as we drove away into the night, I knew with absolute certainty that I had just returned my father's most painful gift, and in doing so, had given myself the greatest gift of all: freedom. The honeymoon was exactly what we needed. 2 weeks in a beachside cottage in Hawaii, far away from family drama and wedding stress. Each morning we woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore. Each night, we fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, counting stars through the skylight above our bed. It was perfect. But reality waited for us back home, as it always does. "Any messages from your dad?" James asked carefully as we unpacked our suitcases in our small apartment. It had been our first home together, and though we'd talked about upgrading now that we were married, I loved its cozy charm. Not a word, I replied, sorting laundry into piles. Mom said he left the reception right after our conversation, didn't say goodbye to anyone. James nodded, hanging up his shirts. Are you okay with that? I paused, considering the question. Yes, I said finally. I think I am. For the first time in my life, I'm not anxiously checking my phone, wondering if he'll call, making up excuses for why he hasn't. That night, lying in our own bed, surrounded by the familiar sounds of our neighborhood, I realized something important. Happiness didn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as this: building a life with someone who loved you for exactly who you were. 2 weeks later, the first letter arrived. It was a formal-looking envelope with my father's law firm's logo in the corner. I stared at it sitting on our kitchen counter for hours before finding the courage to open it. Want me to do it? James offered when he got home from work and found me still contemplating the envelope. I shook my head. No, I need to do this myself. Inside was a typed letter, cold and businesslike, detailing what my father considered his investments in me over the years. College tuition, $43,000, the down payment for my first car, $3,000, a loan for my first apartment security deposit that I'd repaid within 3 months, at $800. Even gifts were itemized: birthday presents, Christmas checks, the pearl necklace I'd worn at my wedding, which had actually been my grandmother's. The total came to $58,842.33. The letter stated that I could arrange a payment plan, or if I preferred, transfer assets of equal value. I laughed until tears ran down my face, the kind of laughter that borders on hysteria. James read the letter over my shoulder, his expression darkening with each line. "This is insane," he said. "He can't seriously expect you to pay him back for raising his own child." "Oh, I think he's very serious," I replied, wiping my eyes. "This is classic Dad, reducing everything to dollars and cents because it's easier than dealing with actual emotions. What are you going to do?" I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Nothing, at least not right now. But my father wasn't someone who accepted being ignored. 3 days later, he called. I let it go to voicemail. "Sarah?" His voice was clipped, professional. "I assume you received my letter. I'd appreciate a response at your earliest convenience. This doesn't need to become contentious if we can reach an agreement like adults." Like adults. As if his behavior at my wedding had been the pinnacle of maturity. I deleted the message without calling back. The next day, he called my workplace. I was with a patient when the unit secretary told me my father was on the line. "Tell him I'm busy," I said, checking an IV line. "Actually, tell him not to call me at work again." That evening, I received a text from my mother. "Your father came by today, wanted your new address. I didn't give it to him." I called her immediately. "Mom, I'm so sorry he's dragging you into this." "Don't worry about me," she said. "I've been dealing with Richard's tactics for 20 years, but Sarah, he seemed different. Angry, but also something else. Almost desperate." Desperate. That didn't sound like my father. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "I don't know exactly. He kept saying something about needing to settle accounts before the end of the month. When I asked him what that meant, he shut down. The conversation left me unsettled. My father was many things: controlling, emotionally distant, transactional in his relationships. But desperate wasn't a word I'd ever associate with him. The following weekend, my Uncle Bob, my father's brother, called. We'd always been close, despite my father's disapproval of his more laid-back, artistic lifestyle. "Hey, kiddo," he said when I answered. "Got time for your favorite uncle?" Always, I replied, smiling despite my wariness. How are you? I'm good. Listen. He hesitated. I heard about what happened at the wedding, and about the letter. My stomach tightened. Did Dad send you to negotiate on his behalf? God, no, Bob laughed. Your father hasn't spoken to me in months. We had a falling out over... Well, that's not important right now. Then how did you know about the letter? Because I got one too, he said quietly. And so did your cousins Jen and Marcus. And your grandmother. I sat down hard on the couch. What? Why would he... Sarah, there's something you need to know about your father. Something I probably should have told you years ago, but he made us all promise not to. For the next hour, Uncle Bob filled in the gaps of the story I'd thought I knew. How my father, the successful corporate attorney with the corner office and luxury car, had been living beyond his means for decades. How his gambling had started as a hobby, poker nights with clients, weekend trips to Vegas, and evolved into a full-blown addiction. How the firm had covered up his misuse of client funds twice, before finally forcing him into early retirement last year. The perfect life he showed the world was held together with duct tape and lies, Bob explained. Your mother leaving him was just the first domino to fall. After that, it was one bad decision after another, trying to maintain appearances while everything crumbled around him. But his new family, I protested. The house in Westchester, private schools for the boys. All financed by massive debt and whatever he could squeeze from family members, Bob said. Diane left him 3 months ago, took the boys back to her parents' place in Connecticut. The house is in foreclosure. My head was spinning. The father I'd spent my life trying to please, whose approval I'd craved, whose financial success I'd both resented and admired, that man was a fiction. Why now? I asked. Why is he suddenly coming after everyone for money? Word is he owes some people, dangerous people, the kind who don't accept payment plans or excuses. The knowledge should have brought me satisfaction, seeing the man who had judged me so harshly brought low by his own mistakes. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Shock, anger, pity, and underneath it all, a lingering trace of that childish need to help my father, to finally earn his love. That evening, I showed James the letter again, this time explaining what Bob had told me. It makes a sick kind of sense, James said, pacing our small living room. The way he reacted at the wedding when he found out my parents had helped with the costs. He was probably embarrassed, maybe even jealous. It doesn't excuse what he did, I said. No, it doesn't, James agreed, sitting beside me and taking my hand. So what do you want to do? I leaned against his shoulder, grateful for his steady presence. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him he made his bed and now he can lie in it. But another part remembers he's still your father. James finished softly. I nodded. Is that pathetic? After everything he's done? It's human, James said, and it's one of the reasons I love you. Your capacity for compassion, even when it's not deserved. The next morning, I called my mother again, filling her in on what Bob had told me. I suspected something like this, she said, her voice sad rather than vindictive. The signs were there if you knew where to look. Did you know about the gambling? She sighed. Not the extent of it. I knew he was reckless with money, that he'd lie about where he'd been or what he'd spent. It was one of the reasons I finally left, though not the main one. What was the main one? I asked, suddenly realizing there were parts of my parents' story I'd never heard. The lying, she said simply. Not just about money or where he'd been, but the constant, everyday dishonesty, pretending to be someone he wasn't, always performing for an audience instead of just being real. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. about the exhaustion of performing, of maintaining a facade, about how my father had constructed this perfect image of success and then sacrificed everything, including his relationships with his family, to maintain it. 3 days later, I made a decision. I called my father and arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, public enough to discourage a scene. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, dressed in what I recognized as his court suit, though it hung a bit loosely on his frame now. He'd aged since the wedding, just 2 months ago. New lines etched around his mouth, gray threading more prominently through his hair. "Sarah," he said, standing as I approached. For a moment, he looked uncertain, as if he might try to hug me, but then thought better of it. "Thank you for meeting me. Let's skip the pleasantries," I said, sitting across from him. "I know about the gambling. I know about the firm forcing you out. I know about Diane leaving." His face hardened. "Bob has a big mouth. Bob cares about you, which is more than you deserve." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I'm not here to judge you or to gloat. I'm here to tell you that I'm not giving you a penny." His mouth thinned to a tight line. "I paid for your education, your first car, the roof over your head when—" "You're my father," I interrupted. "That's what parents do. They provide for their children without keeping a ledger. But since you're so interested in accounting, let's talk about what you owe me." I pulled out a small notebook, where I'd made some calculations of my own. 27 Father's Days at approximately 4 hours each. That's 108 hours of my time you missed. At my current nursing salary of $38 an hour, that's $4,104. His face flushed. "This is absurd." "I'm not finished," I continued calmly. 15 missed birthdays, conservatively valued at $500 each for emotional distress. That's $7,500. 1 high school graduation and 1 college graduation at $2,000 each for significant life events missed. 1 wedding dance abandoned halfway, causing public humiliation. $10,000. I flipped the page. Then there's the therapy bills. 6 years at $150 per session, weekly at first, then bi-weekly. That comes to approximately $3,500 to process the abandonment issues, the self-doubt, the constant feeling that I wasn't enough to make you stay. My father's face had gone from red to white. "You can't possibly—" "My total comes to $60,704, I said, closing the notebook. "Which, as you can see, exceeds your claim of $58,742.33, but I'm willing to call it even." He stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his life. "I don't want your money, Dad," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I never did. All I ever wanted was your time, your presence, your love without conditions." "You don't understand what I'm dealing with," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "The people I owe, they're not patient, they're not reasonable." "That sounds like a problem of your making," I replied, "and while I sympathize, I can't fix it for you." His shoulders slumped. For a moment, I glimpsed the vulnerable man beneath the armor, scared, alone, drowning in consequences of his own making. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. And in that question, I heard the little boy he must have once been, before life and his own choices hardened him. I felt my resolve wavering. This was still my father, still the man who had once carried me on his shoulders at the state fair, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had, before he left us, sometimes looked at me with genuine pride. "I can't give you money," I said finally, "but I might be able to help you find a way through this." By the time I got home that evening, my emotions were raw and conflicted. James was waiting, concern written across his face as soon as I walked through the door. "How did it go?" he asked, pulling me into a hug. I leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his steadiness. "I don't know. Complicated." Over dinner, I told him everything. The confrontation, my father's desperation, and what I'd eventually proposed, that I would help him find legitimate resources for his gambling addiction and his debt problems, but I wouldn't enable him with money. I gave him information about Gamblers Anonymous and a financial counselor who specializes in debt restructuring, I explained, pushing pasta around my plate without eating much. I also told him about a lawyer who might be able to help if these dangerous people he owes are actually loan sharks. James reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did more than many people would have in your position. But not as much as a daughter should, I said, the guilt creeping in despite my best efforts. Hey, James said firmly, you're setting healthy boundaries. That's not being a bad daughter. It's being a smart adult who's learned from experience. That night, I dreamt of my childhood home, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, the creak of the third stair, the smell of my mother's cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. In the dream, I was looking for something important, moving from room to room with increasing urgency, but I couldn't remember what I'd lost. I woke before dawn, the dream lingering like a half-forgotten melody. James slept peacefully beside me, one arm flung above his head. I watched him for a moment, marveling at how easy it was to love him, how uncomplicated. Why couldn't my relationship with my father be that straightforward? Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance, but stayed informed through Uncle Bob. My father had, surprisingly, taken some of my advice. He'd attended 2 GA meetings and had an appointment with the financial counselor. It's baby steps, Bob told me during our weekly phone call. But even baby steps are progress. Has he said anything about me? I asked, hating that I still cared. Bob hesitated. Not directly. But he keeps the wedding photo on his desk, the one of you in your dress, before everything went sideways. That small detail lodged in my heart like a splinter, painful but impossible to ignore. Despite everything, some small part of me still yearned for reconciliation, still hoped for the father-daughter relationship I'd never truly had. Work became my refuge. As a pediatric nurse, I dealt with real problems: sick children, worried parents, actual matters of life and death. It put my family drama into perspective. The children in my care didn't hold grudges. They lived in the present moment, finding joy wherever they could. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, I was charting at the nurse's station when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your father collapsed today. Memorial Hospital, room 412. My hands shook as I called James. I'll meet you there, he said without hesitation. The hospital was across town from mine. I drove on autopilot, my mind racing through possibilities. Heart attack? Stroke? Something worse? The gambling debts catching up to him in the most violent way. When I arrived, James was already in the waiting area. He'd brought me a change of clothes, knowing I was coming straight from work. What do we know? I asked as we walked toward the elevators. Not much. I talked to the charge nurse. He was brought in this afternoon. Possible heart attack. They're running tests. Room 412 was at the end of a long corridor. The door was partially open, and I could see my father lying in the bed, attached to monitors, an IV in his arm. He looked small somehow, diminished. His eyes were closed. Uncle Bob was sitting in a chair by the window. He stood when he saw us. Mild heart attack, he said quietly, stepping into the hallway to talk to us. They did an angiogram. One of his arteries is 80% blocked. They're planning a stent procedure tomorrow morning. I nodded, medical training kicking in. That's good. Stenting has a high success rate. Bob rubbed his face wearily. The doctor said stress was likely a major factor. Of course it was. Living a double life for decades, gambling addiction, financial ruin, family estrangement. The wonder wasn't that his heart had finally rebelled, but that it had taken this long. Has anyone called Diane? I asked. Or the boys? My half-brothers, who I barely knew. "They're on their way from Connecticut," Bob said. "Should be here by morning." I approached the bed cautiously. My father's eyes fluttered open as I came closer. "Sarah?" His voice was raspy, uncertain. "I'm here, Dad." He looked past me to James hovering in the doorway, then back to me. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," I said simply. A nurse came in to check his vitals, and we stepped back to give her room. When she left, my father seemed more alert, pushing himself up slightly against the pillows. "The doctor says I need to reduce stress," he said with a weak attempt at his old sardonic humor. "Apparently, nearly dying in a cardiac unit isn't conducive to that goal." I didn't smile. "This isn't a joke, Dad." He sighed, the brief spark of humor fading. "I know. Nothing about my life feels very funny right now." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. So much unsaid between us. So many years of hurt and misunderstanding. And now this. Mortality asserting itself, demanding acknowledgement. "I'll give you two some privacy," James said, squeezing my shoulder before stepping out with Uncle Bob. Alone with my father, I sat in the chair Bob had vacated. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I never meant to hurt you," he said finally, staring at the ceiling. "At your wedding. Any of it." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "I was jealous," he continued, "seeing you so happy, so complete without me. Seeing James's family welcome you so warmly when I've never been able to—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I've never been good at the things that matter. Relationships, emotional connections." "You didn't even try," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. He nodded, accepting the accusation. "I didn't know how. My own father was, well, he was worse than me, if you can believe it. Cold. Distant. The only time he showed any interest was when I succeeded at something. Won a case, made partner, bought the big house." He closed his eyes briefly. "I thought that's what fathers did. Pushed their children to succeed, rewarded achievement, ignored failure. I thought about that, about the generational patterns that shape us, about how easy it is to repeat the mistakes of our parents, without even realizing it. That doesn't excuse what you did," I said, "or what you didn't do." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He turned his head to look at me directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sarah. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. Not because of what you've achieved, though that's impressive, but because of who you are. The kind of person who would come to the hospital for a father who doesn't deserve it." Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't say these things just because you're scared. I'm saying them because they're true," he replied, "and because I may not get another chance." "You're getting a stent, not last rites," I said, falling back on nurse humor to mask my emotions. "The success rate is over 90%. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always prepared, always practical. You get that from your mother." We lapsed into silence again, but it felt different now, less charged, more contemplative. "What happens now?" I asked eventually. "After the procedure, after you recover?" He sighed. "I don't know. The house is gone. My reputation in legal circles is complicated. Diane and I are trying to work things out, but it's not easy rebuilding trust once it's broken." I nodded, understanding that reality all too well. "One day at a time," I said. "That's what they say in those meetings you've been attending, right?" He looked surprised that I knew about GA. "Bob has a big mouth. Bob cares about you," I repeated my words from the coffee shop. "And so do I, despite everything." My father's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I don't deserve that. Probably not, I agreed. But that's the thing about family, Dad. Real family. It's not about what we deserve. It's about what we're willing to work for, what we're willing to fight to rebuild. The door opened, and James peeked in. Sorry to interrupt, but the doctor's here to talk about tomorrow's procedure. I stood, smoothing my scrubs. I should go. You need to rest, and I have an early shift tomorrow. My father caught my hand as I turned to leave. His grip was weak, but insistent. Sarah, thank you. I nodded, gently extracting my hand from his. I'll be back tomorrow after the procedure. In the hallway, James wrapped his arm around me as we walked toward the elevators. You okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My relationship with my father was still complicated, still fraught with history and hurt. One hospital conversation wouldn't erase years of neglect and pain. But something had shifted. A small crack in the wall between us. A glimmer of possibility, where before there had been only resignation and anger. I think I will be, I said finally. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Outside, the evening had turned cool and clear, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. We stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in the fresh air after hours in the hospital's antiseptic environment. You know what I was thinking about in there? I said as we walked to our cars. What? That moment at our wedding, when I told my father I was giving everything back to him. James nodded, waiting for me to continue. I thought I was setting myself free by rejecting all those years of pain and disappointment. And maybe I was. But I'm realizing now that true freedom isn't about giving back the hurt or even about forgiveness. It's about choosing what you carry forward and what you leave behind. I looked up at the stars, thinking about the legacy of fathers and daughters, about patterns broken and remade, about the family I'd been born into, and the one I was creating with James. I don't know if my father and I will ever have the relationship I dreamed of as a little girl, I said. But I'm choosing to leave room for possibility, not for his sake, but for mine. James kissed my forehead, his presence steady and reassuring as always. One day at a time, he echoed. One day at a time, I agreed. As we drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about the complexity of healing, how it rarely follows a straight line, how sometimes the most important boundary you can set is the one that leaves a door slightly ajar, not for others to enter uninvited, but for you to pass through when you're ready. My father had given me back something unexpected that day in his hospital room. Not the perfect relationship I'd longed for, but something more valuable, the truth. His truth, unvarnished and imperfect, offered not as an excuse but as a context, a starting point. And in return, I had given him something too. Not forgiveness, not yet, but its prerequisite, understanding. The possibility that someday, the ledger between us might finally be balanced not by money or blame or guilt, but by the currency that matters most, honesty, effort, and time. The dance floor moment at my wedding hadn't been an ending after all. It had been the beginning of a different kind of relationship. One based not on fantasy or obligation, but on reality, on seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time, with all our flaws and failings exposed. Whether that new relationship would flourish or wither remained to be seen. But as I pulled into our driveway, home to the life James and I were building together, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Whatever happened with my father, I had already received the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that I was whole on my own, capable of both setting boundaries and extending compassion, of protecting my heart while still leaving it open to possibility. And that, I realized, was what I had truly been searching for all along.